Today's Holy Gospel comes to us from Matthew 22. Jesus tells a parable indicating that the blessings of God's kingdom are available to all, but the invitation is to not be taken lightly. Once more, Jesus spoke to them in parables, saying, "The kingdom of heaven may be compared to a king who gave a wedding banquet for his son. He sent his slaves to call those who had been invited to the wedding banquet, but they would not come. Again, he sent other slaves, saying, 'Tell those who have been invited, look, I've prepared my dinner. My oxen and my fat calves have been slaughtered, and everything is ready. Come to the wedding banquet.' But they made light of it and went away. One to his farm, another to his business, while the rest seized his slaves, mistreated him, and killed him. The king was enraged. He sent his troops, destroyed those murderers, and burned their city. Then he said to his slaves, 'The wedding is ready, but those invited were not worthy. Go therefore into the main streets and invite everyone you find to the wedding banquet.' Those slaves were sent out into the streets and gathered all they had found, both good and bad, so the wedding hall was filled with guests. But when the king came in to see the guests, he noticed a man there who was not wearing a wedding robe. And he said to him, 'Friend, how did you get in here without a wedding robe?' And he was speechless. The king said to the attendants, 'Bind him hand and foot and throw him to the outer darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. For many are called, but few are chosen.' The gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ." So Jesus is sitting in the temple telling parables, teaching stories. And there's a mix of folks in the crowd, people genuinely interested in what Jesus has to say, and dishonored and shamed priests and elders. Remember, Jesus came into Jerusalem and was given like a ticker tape parade upon entering. He comes to the temple and he kicks up a fuss because the elders and the priests had been lining their pockets with donations. Jesus then chases the money changers out, sits down as a teacher would, and through a series of stories continually lowers the status, lowers the honor of the chief priests and elders. It's almost like Jesus has a target on their heads, because each story he tells makes the chief priests and elders feel worse and worse. The first parable is the parable of the two sons, where he highlights the difference between what the priests say and what they actually do. The next parable is the parable of the tenants, pointing out how the priests have occupied the temple, but for their own gain and not for the good of the people. And then we get to this story, a story about respect, honor. This is the highest commodity in ancient Eastern culture, honor. Here's the story. A marriage has been planned for the king's son, and the initial invitations were sent out so that everyone on the guest list could make plans to attend. Because in those times, travel over long distances took some time. So plans needed to be made long in advance, a huge save the date. However, those invited declined to attend the wedding. In ancient culture, to refuse an invitation, especially from the king, was a big no-no, is very dishonoring to the king. Also, not a great idea. It'd be like being invited to your boss's wedding, but deciding last minute not to go because you didn't feel like going or you found something better to do. How do you think that would affect your relationship with your boss? Back to our story. So the king sends a second, more urgent invitation to the same people as the wedding date got closer. But the invitees declined. Maybe they thought no one would miss them. Or they had other things they wanted to do instead of. Maybe they go to the next wedding. Proving their contempt, their lack of regard and honor for their king, they treated the king's servants, who had personally handed the invitations to them, with great disrespect. And some even killed some of those slaves, those servants. The king, rightly so, was furious, and he mustered his forces, his army, to avenge his mistreated servants, to erase the disrespect shown to him. His kindness, his generosity had been spurned, and he responded with anger, with wrath. The king sent his army. A third invitation had to be sent. And for this one, the guest list changed. From specifically invited to everybody, to the everyday person, no matter their position, honor, or status in society. Because you can't have a party without people. Now, the custom in those days was for the one hosting the wedding feast, in this case, the king, the custom was to provide garments for the wedding guests. The wedding garments were simple, nondescript robes, so that all in attendance were the same. In this way, rank or station was covered. Everyone at the party could mingle and hang as equals. When the king enters the wedding hall, he notices that one guest clearly stands out from all the others because he's not wearing a wedding garment. Having the man brought forward, the king asks, "Friend, how did you come in here without a wedding garment?" It might be better phrased, "Why are you not wearing a wedding garment, even though one was provided for you?" The man was plainly not dressed for this occasion. His lack of a wedding garment was also an example of extreme disrespect for both the king and his son. The wording, "he was speechless," indicates he didn't have an excuse. It was not just that he lacked a wedding garment, but that he did not wear one on purpose. He had defiantly refused to put one on. He wanted to attend the party, but he wanted it to attend on his own terms. This is why the king reacts so swiftly and so harshly. Bind him hand and foot, take him away, cast him into outer darkness where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. His judgment is not against the man's lack of a wedding garment per se, but that he did not intend to wear one. He was, in fact, determined not to wear one. The man desired the honor of attending the wedding feast, but did not want to follow the custom of the king. He wanted to do things his own way. His lack of proper dress revealed his inner rebellion against the king and his instructions. He was executed as a rebel. And it's here where Jesus inserts his kind of cryptic phrase, "For many are called, but few are chosen." This is a story. Now again, remember who Jesus is telling this story to, who his focus was. The chief priests and the elders. Jesus' kingdom was coming. All of Israel was invited, regardless of status and rank. Not just the priests and the elders, but everyday people. Everyone was invited. But not everyone took God up on his invitation. In fact, some actively refused the invite and killed those announcing its arrival. Remember what had been done to John the Baptist. The last analogy cracks me up. The guest who showed up but wasn't wearing wedding clothes. Jesus is sitting in the temple looking at the chief priests and elders who are still in the temple, but they aren't there to learn. They aren't there because they believe in Jesus. They are there for themselves, under their own terms. Jesus is saying, you're welcome to the party too, but you're going to have to humble yourselves and put on my robes. Can you do that? For many are called, but few are chosen. Can you imagine the awkward silence after he gets done with these series of stories, especially this last one? I don't think you would need a moderator for this debate. Jesus has it handled. So, what's the principle? Remember each parable, each story we read in the Bible, Jesus not only has something for that time, but has a timeless principle for us. We can extrapolate that principle from this ancient story and then plant it into our modern context. From one level, you could look at what kind of kingdom Jesus was building, and how everyone, regardless of status, position, honor, or cleanliness, is invited to join. And as Lutherans, we believe very strongly that everyone's included in the final eschatological party. God chooses all of us. God chooses us first. But today, I want to get a little bit more personal, maybe even a little bit more practical. I would say that each day we are invited to join with God. Each day we are invited to drop our plans, our to-do lists, our egos, and join God's activity. But we have to make time. God's plans might not coincide with our plans. Number two, it's going to take effort on our part. And then lastly, we're going to have to willingly put on the clothes that Christ gives us. We're going to have to be okay with Jesus changing us. Let's start with the first one. We have to make time, because God's plans might not coincide with our plans. We tend to overcomplicate God's guidance and direction. We try to read the tea leaves and look for whispers in the wind. But what if it's that still small voice that nudges us to not think of ourselves, but to think of other people? I have a sneaking suspicion you know the little internal voice that I'm talking about. Secondly, it takes effort. We have to stop what we're doing and follow that nudge. And I think it gets easier over time, the more you do it. The recognizing and following of God's still small voice. It's a skill. And we can develop that skill. We can get more in tune with, more in sync with what God is saying and asking us to do. But developing a skill takes effort. Beautiful thing is, I think it gets easier to hear God's voice and respond the more we do it. It's almost like we are ready for God to direct us, anticipating that God is going to direct us. Matthew 5:5, blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. A better translation of the Greek word praeus would be ready. Blessed are those who are ready for God. The word praeus was used to define a horse trained for battle. Author Sam Watley writes this: wild stallions were brought down from the mountains and broken for riding. Some were used to pull wagons. Some were raced. And the best were trained for warfare. They retained their fierce spirit, courage, and power, but were disciplined to respond to the slightest nudge or pressure of the rider's leg. They could gallop into battle at 35 miles an hour and come to a sliding stop at a word. They weren't frightened by arrows, spears, or torches. Then they were said to be meeked. To be meeked was to be taken from a state of wild rebellion and made completely loyal to and dependent upon one's master. It's also to be taken from an atmosphere of fearfulness and made unflinching in the presence of danger. Some war horses were dove from ravines into rivers in the pursuit of their quarry. Some charged into the face of exploding cannons, as Lord Tennyson expressed in his poem, The Charge of the Light Brigade. These stallions became submissive, but certainly not spineless. They embodied power under control, strength with forbearance. What if you walked through your day meeked, ready to be used by God? How would that change how you lived your day? Last one. We have to be okay with God changing us. If you consistently respond to God's invitation and follow God again and again, you're going to find yourself being changed. You will look more and more like the person you're supposed to be, more like Jesus. New Testament author Paul uses a clothing imagery too. He instructs believers to put on the Lord Jesus Christ. Make no provisions for the flesh to gratify its desires. Sometimes the command is to put on certain godly characteristics that are a reflection of Jesus. Put on then, as God's chosen ones, holy and beloved, compassionate hearts. Put on kindness, humility, meekness, there it is again, and patience. Thus, the call to put on these godly characteristics is rooted in our status as those who are holy, chosen, and loved by God. God's nudgings are most often nudgings of being more compassionate towards others, more kind, less ego-driven, patient with others. These are the clothes that we're invited every day to put on. You see how they're not about us. They're about others. You have to take off your own stuff and put on God's stuff, God's clothes. I'm going to ask you to do something this week. I'm going to ask you to carve out a little space in your schedule, because I believe that God is waiting to meet with you. He really is. Set aside some porch time or dog walking time and actively give God some space to talk with you, to be with you. People ask all the time, how does God talk to us? How does God direct us? Number one, give God space and time. So carve out some time in your week. Secondly, bring a paper and a pen. Write down what God nudgings happen while you give God space. So where in your life can you serve others? Be more compassionate. Is there a relationship that could use a good dose of humility? Or do you have someone that God is calling you to be more patient with, more kind with? Lastly, let God change you. Pray some specific gutsy prayers. Like, God, make me more like Jesus, more like your son. God, help me be more humble, less about myself. Jesus, help me be a more kind person. Help me be patient with others. That's my challenge for us this week. And the good news is we're invited to an amazing adventure of living each day like Jesus. But you're going to have to make time, effort, and be willing to be changed. Amen.